So, right, welcome everybody. Day 4, pilot season, and all of that. Now, I don't want to spend hours chatting about stuff. Last stream, we had our first live crash, which was glorious. It turns out I had saved not long before, so I really did a little bit of work. We're pretty much back where we started. I actually cleaned up a couple things. I lied, I said I would have done literally everything in screen. Well, I didn't say literally everything in screen. All the relevant work still stays on screen, but there's some stuff you just don't want to see me doing, like, clicking together controls and stuff like that. So let's get to it, because I would actually like to show something and get somewhere today. Now, let me check the last couple things. All right, let me retweet Ryan, who's courteously made my Cult of Free Live post on Twitter for me. Now, let's get on with it. So what I would like to do today is actually further the rig a little bit, look at a couple of things, and the idea of the pilot season is trying to touch on a little bit of everything in terms of what I've mentioned, escalating various first principles from the nothing to the actual useful and understandable. So I might, depending on where we get, I might actually have a first shot at a 10 minutes math lesson today, this isn't really relevant, but the people who know what this is can actually imagine. We're going to have a quick look at vectors. So going back to the rig, I am going to work on the wheel and pedals today. It means I actually want to get rid of that. What I've done is also move things where I actually want them to be and not being centerward, because that makes it a little bit too easy, inapplicably easy sometimes. All right, let me pick up the chat again. Cult of Controls. Yeah, Cult of Controls is pretty much what it's going to be today. Now, point in case, what I was saying the other day is when I was saying don't design controls like these. I had the viewport set pretty much like these with one axis only, and I kid you not, was going insane trying to figure out why the hell Maya was not rotating things the right way. So this is yet another reason why this is a horrifying control design. Now, I'm not going to say this is going to be, this is great and this is what you should do. But when I was talking about giving things some directionality and making sure that they can be selected from all views, this is the classic trick. You have three planes, if you have your 3D space like that, you're going to have the plane orthogonal to X, and you're going to have the plane orthogonal to Y, and you're going to have a plane orthogonal to Z. Try and have something that registers on all of those for things that have 6 degrees of freedom. And for some other things where you want to be able to select on both sides, and I will say, the staves and hinge, is it? Staves and bar, whatever it is, I don't know the technical names for unicycles. For the pedals, and this was a question the other day, some animator was saying, oh, it's a fault of the rigger if a control is not easily selectable and you have to constantly tumble the camera. I will agree with that. Now, there is no real situation, obviously there can always be special cases if you break the pedals or something, but there's no real short-term situation where these two things shouldn't be actually coupled in their working. So there's no real reason to have two separate controls, and there's no real reason to not have, one control that spans both. Now, quick note on the Maya side, I've heard people saying, oh, it's better to have multiple shapes under one transform, and, it's a bit of a legend. Now, as is often the case, plugins and even some tools internal to Maya don't deal super well with special circumstances, and that's why multiple shapes under a transform or namespaces get a bad name, no pun intended. I only realized as I was saying it. It's fine. Have however many shapes you think is actually suited under a transfer for a control, so long as you make sure that you manage it everywhere, so that when you write scripts and stuff like that, you don't assume that it's just going to be one shape, and you don't assume that the shape is always going to be, whatever this name is plus shape concatenated. As long as you manage it, it's fine. I've done it for many, many years. It's not really an issue. Now, myth busting aside, so we haven't really connected the wheel and the pedals yet, and as I've mentioned before, you could have the actual wheel affecting the pedals if what you want is the unicycle driving around, the wheel spinning, maybe automated, the pedals spinning, and the character gets driven by the pedals. or you could actually want it the other way around. See, this is horrifying. I need to change that soon, but I'll do it off screen. Again, now not connected or anything, so again we'll limit what we want to work on. Pedals we find here. Let's hide the wheel as well, and let's focus on these for a little bit. Now the simplest possible control, oh man, see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This control, I'm gonna hide it for now. So this is the simplest possible thing you can do. Now the connection between these and the actual stave should be pretty simple. It should be just a bunch of transforms going out. So we have the control, we're getting the word transform, and this is one of these things. Like, we will certainly get into matrices. For now, even if I explicitly say, you know, it's not good to rig by tricks. This is not really a trick. This is just, for now, consider it a given thing if you don't know what matrices are. If you want the word transform of something, just get the word matrix, use a decompose node that will turn it into a rotate scale translate, and then you can use it for the local space as something else. So this is in our output interface, and that's what we're going out to stuff with. I've also, and I will share these scenes very soon, especially the model. Some people on the forum actually asked. You can work with cubes and cylinders if you want to get a head start on these. The geometry being pretty isn't really determinant in learning to rig. Now, I've also zeroed out all the HRC nodes, and I'm actually connecting rigid transforms directly to the mesh transforms. Again, you know, if this was an actual later on in the seasons kind of rig, I will probably do something different. But for starters, or if you have something that is purely rigid transforms, there's no mixes, and you know, you have control over the model, you don't have to cope with modeling like freezing the hell out of everything, or you giving you stuff that's off-centered by mouse, that's good enough. Now, doing stuff like these, sort of recapping a bit here, also means that you got to be mindful of pivots, and that's why I don't really like using them. I try to have all the transforms lined up so that I always only deal with local and word and nothing else, and if need be, you know, the inversion of that or the parents. And but it all boils down to just two types of transform: a localized one and the word space matrix. To do that reliably without bumping into any surprises, you always want your pivots to be either 0 or equivalent to the actual translate that you have in there. So with that out of the way, I will take questions in like 5 minutes or something like that. So if you want to start punching them in chat, especially about the previous episode or something like that, feel free to punch them in. Now, the next thing we want to do goes without saying. If you do a rig, like study how the thing you're rigging actually works a little bit. This is a unicycle. It's not like it's, you know, high engineering. It's not particularly hard. There's gonna be a staff that's gonna be clamped to some tubular item of sorts that goes to the other staff. There is normally gonna be a pin of sorts that has a little bit of play coming out of that stuff on the other end, and there is a pedal that can free spin out of it. Now, right now, we have one issue to solve right away, which is the animator can basically do something that we don't want him to do. If you wanted shake, and there's usually some degree of it, or you don't see it very easily unless the object has large tolerances and a lot of mass thrown around. Unless you want shake or something like that, it's usually good to limit things. Now, one thing to bear in mind is some people will just go, and it's not bad to do it actually, you know, some people will go in and lock early on the stuff that they don't want people to touch. That is not necessarily great. I mean, your pipeline might be eliding the locks. It might eventually connect things to parameters that were locked. Constraints can certainly do it in some situations. So if you rely on the input interface to be part of the function of how things move along down the rig, you might be in trouble later on. The better thing to do would be only take the relevant data. So if this is what the animator does, you know, they're okay, let me pick that up. This is all they're supposed to do. They're rotating that. Make sure that this is the first axis in your rotation order, which is the non-dominant axis actually. So make sure that you're in gimbal mode in your rotation settings. And it basically means that no matter what you do, sure, you can gimbal the X, but no matter what you do, this is always applied last. So it will not affect other axes and stuff like that. Now we have these and we have the output matrix going on. If this is word space, you know, you're in luck. Otherwise, you might want to take the translate, and you know, if you're in default spaces and all of that. Otherwise, you might actually take just the translate and the scale from the word and choose to do something much more reductive with the actual rotation. So it should be just rotate X in this case, and this might spare you a lot of pain later on. So obviously the controls are going to go off kilter. So the locking is right, you want to lock, but the locking is supposed to be an interface operation. It's not supposed to determine what data goes through. And if the constraints break it, you know, it will only break the interface, which is expected because that's what they're manipulating, and not break the actual functionality. Now, moving on. There are two ways that you might want the pedals to work. So right now we're not really doing anything significant with it. Hierarchy-wise, I've added these off stream, but I am sure you guys can figure out what's going on. It's straight up hierarchy. And we're gonna, sorry, just a sec. And we're actually gonna break up this hierarchy and make it wider and less deep. Now, very often you want two ways for the pedals to operate, and most of the time this is not it, because what is going on here is that as you actually turn these, your pedals, tendentially speaking, if they're well lubed, if they're well lubricated, or if there's weight sitting on them that wins against the friction applied to the pin, they will actually be flat to the word, or they will be driven by something. We're not going to look at complex projections for rotations and stuff like that, but at the very least we want to get rid of that rotation when we turn these around if we're doing an FK kind of rig, so that if we constrain the fit to those things, you don't get the fit flipping around like that as the character pedals through, well, as the unicycle moves on and the character moves consequentially. Now that's stupidly easy to do, so I think it's enough faffing about for it. What we want to do is affect the buffer, because the rotation we want to leave free for people to control. So we're going to take the buffer for those and add I started putting some of my shortcuts back in because I was just not able to work properly before. What we want to do is basically apply the opposite of the rotation we have here, or depending on things you're oriented, you might even get away with just a rotation, and apply it to the buffer. Make sure that everything is where you want it to be. In this case, you know, the translation will be, it should be like that. The translation will be somewhere to place this control where it belongs. That's perfectly fine. The rotation should be zeroed out. We're also getting that. So if I actually, in this case, we have XYZ, which is the default rotation order. If you were working off some other axis, make sure that those are consistent. Now, if we did something like that, it's probably going to double up the rotations. So something that I see people do a lot is using the hierarchies to actually apply transforms and transmit differences down the chain of operations. Not fond of that. Whenever you want to change that dependency from being hierarchical to actually being a bunch of connections, because you need to decouple the pedals, and hopefully we'll get to that. We should be able to get to that. Then suddenly you had predicated a lot of functionality on something that's just been broken. So not a great idea. Whereas proper graph connections against minimal elements, they tend to stay alive and useful for much longer. Now, in layman terms, that means that, okay, let's see if I can do that. Yeah, let's do it numerically, easier. So if you did something like that, now in theory the rotation should be, yeah, it should be inverted the way we want it. But again, the moment this comes out and goes somewhere else, unless you make sure that you preserve that in some relative space, not fun, wouldn't do it. So negate that. Now, eventually we will get to, I don't think there's, is there a multiply angles? I don't think there's a multiply angle by default in Maya. angle between angle dimension. There's blends and stuff like that, which is not what we want. So we'll have to use a normal multiply, and let me see, because there's multi-double linear. If there was a multi-angle, which I don't see, that would be ideal. But now the big fat nodes, you don't always need them. If you only have two items, like two floats, two scalars to some description, if you're working in a vector system, don't go and take something that works in 1D, 2D, 3D. It's inside the node that has to do some work that you don't want it to do. Not fond of this, but this will basically put a unit conversion in. What I actually prefer is writing node libraries that have explicit input and output types. For now, we're going to deal with these. Now, what we want to do for this one is negate, which is multiplication by -1. I'm sure this is just blowing somebody's mind. And now we get another free unit conversion node. Again, you know, it will pollute your graph a bit, but that's the way Maya allows you to use a small set of nodes on a lot of things. When you get to write your own nodes, very specialized, many nodes that are very specialized are pretty useful to have around. I've been preaching that to a few people that are in chat now for a while, and some of them have taken it to heart. I think Ryan Porter actually has some stuff open source. I don't want to speak for him, but he's in chat. So Ryan, if you're a mod, so you can post links. If you have your nodes available open source, post the link, please, and I'll show it in the video or something. So now that we have that kind of relationship, that also sounds kind of off, but it's maybe my mind that is in the gutter. All right, we have the counter rotation, which is good. The better news again is that if we were to put those out and operate the transform differently, that will still work. Well, it does still work because we connected it like that. So far so good. Let's also, I'm a big fan. So here's something. I see a lot of people like doing a lot of vertical work, like prototyping something to the nth degree, thinking that having to connect things to the pretty geo and stuff like that takes too long. And it's an entry fee basically. Whenever you want to go out to a geo when you're not quite ready to do the binding or the deformation stages, is a little bit of a flat cost. You're gonna pay for it every time you have to establish that, and then you might need to break it, rearrange things, which is what I had to do for 10 minutes before the stream to get the geo in the right places. I find that very much like profiling and debugging when you're writing code, the more frequently you do it, the more frequently you have some reliable and isolated visual representation of the result of what you're doing, the better off you are by a very, very, very long distance. So we have the staff mesh and all of that. We're good. Now, pin, we don't want to transform the pin. I should probably turn off shapes. A few more shortcuts that I actually need to get in. And for the record, when you see nodes disappearing, I just have bindings for pretty much everything that is up here. And if you have clicked your way through these for long enough time, you can bind them to the top row of your keyboard or something like that. And it works pretty well, because you can just, if you don't remember where something is, me personally at least, I can look at these and know just what letter to punch. I don't know if that constitutes an actual tip, but it's what I got. Now, here's another thing. So the relationship between this mesh, and let's have a look if it's true, and something that's above it might be very similar to the relationship that you have between the buffer of these and something that is above. So you might be tempted to take the position of this buffer, of the buffer of this control, add the position of the control, and use that addition to actually drive the mesh. I will recommend you don't do it for the same reason that I don't recommend that you actually rely on hierarchies, because you just did. You just, somewhere else, you just relied, even if through raw attributes, on the hierarchy of something. And not only that, you've also relied on the hierarchy of your target, which is usually not a great idea. So what we want to drive, the rotation, same thing. We could decide to do minimal connections, or we could decide to do bigger connections. That was pen against tablet, nothing broke. And lost my train of thought. Okay, and We could choose to use we could choose to have the rotations very, very simple. Depends how we transmit all kind of stuff. Now, if we, in this case, we should probably be able to just connect the rotate text. I'm gonna do what I just suggested that people don't do in a way, and do absolutely nothing with it. Sorry, what rotation was I affecting there? Oh, I was actually affecting the rotation of the buffer. So you could actually, again, if your rotation order is right, and yes, I'm just gonna be contradict myself and rely on the hierarchy for a moment. Then we'll see when it breaks, and then we'll see how to fix it eventually. Might not quite get there today, but so if you work with very minimal values, that's another thing I actually like. You get to do very simple things and get expected results instead of having to noodle too many nodes. So I love these features of the node editor, like the way it rearranges your entire graph when you connect something. It's gold. It's so useful. It's exactly what I want from my node editor. Now, if I have the rotation of the buffer that counters what I have, then I want to also add to it whatever the animator has added with these. But for now, just the buffer is always driven. So let's start with that. Let's get the output, get it into the rotation X, get our graph rearranged again, try to figure out where things went. Okay, so it decided to move the node that I had at the very end, at the beginning of the graph. That's supremely useful. Let me check chat for a sec. So yes, Ryan actually has nodes available, and you can go on GitHub, and it's on Yantor3D, YANTOR 3D, and there's gonna be Angular nodes. I'll see, actually, let me pick it up and show it real quick. I do strongly recommend having something like this around. So this is the page, this is the nodes. I assume there's going to be compiled ones available as well. Get yourself some angles. It will spare you from a lot of graph rearranging and, you know, a lot of paying 3 nodes for just having the one that you actually wanted. I just realized that the node editor a little bit off screen for a bit. I hope everything was clear regardless. Now we have the control, which we haven't added in yet, but let's check that what we have done actually works. So now, nope, not yet. So let's have a look. What do we have here? So this is the mesh. Is it actually? So the buffer is producing a rotation that's driving the control. And that is, what am I doing that's stupid here? Am I not connecting something? Input 70, inputs, oh, it's a multiply, stupid. Yep, I should have used an add. So yeah, that's me being an idiot, basically. What I actually wanted there was an add. We'll replace it. Shouldn't have multiplied at all. So we do have the relationship between the items that we're talking about, and that's me doing copy and pasting. Never a great idea, not in code, not in graphs. Again from Ryan, they're under the plugins folder, there are compile nodes, Linux, and Maya 2014, 2016, CMake file with instruction. You're on your own for a Mac compile. Yeah, everybody's on their own for a Mac compile, both users. So, nah, sorry, I'm kidding. Actually, there's a lot of Mac users that do development on Mac. I don't know why, crazy people. So let's actually fix that right away. Add double linear instead of all this crud. Let's do it properly instead of doing crappy stuff. Or let's at least reduce the crap a little bit. Now, what we have here is that this doesn't affect things yet, so what we want to do, might as well do it, is hook this one in. So, raise events or do not raise your hand or whatever. If anything is unclear insofar, ask about it. If you know, if you want more details on something. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep moving on because I would like to get something done. So this is an amazing rig, but obviously it's not. The takeaway from something like this and I've been preaching this for a while, for people that are new to, you know, efficient rigging, efficient in terms of pure performance, which will be even more efficient without all these unit conversions, is learn what your atomic items are and try to establish everything as minimal connections if you can. Understand the graph. That's probably the most important thing to do when you want to escalate the quality of your rigs in terms of performance. Learn to use the node editor. It needs some love. It definitely needs some love. It will be incredibly frustrating to use, but please kill the hypergraph. I know there are people that still use it because it shows hierarchies. I wish I could say I understand. I don't. It's horrible. The hypergraph has always been one of the worst node editors ever. Put some pressure on Autodesk to actually make this thing more useful by fixing bugs and stuff. So somebody was saying, I'm not entirely sure if I understand the math. Could you explain it just a little bit? Drop me a note in there about what part of the math. For now, it's probably me noodling that has confused things. I'm literally doing nothing special math-wise. But sure, we can break down what is going on. Now, there's got to be a song here, like what is the hip bone is connected to the leg bone or something like that. Somebody that can actually sing should put one together for the unicycle. So what we're doing here, if you graph the items, and I think we have all of the graph live, is we order the rotations to make sure that the first axis, which ironically is not the dominant axis, is the one that we're interested in. In this case, we're only interested in rotating on the x-axis. It's the first in the rotation order, so we're good. It means that when people do these, you know, the x-axis is still independent. It's not getting affected by other contributing factors. Ignore the unit conversions node. That's just Maya having an angle, and it's a unit attribute of type angle. And it's going into, which is blue, this light blue thingy, and it's going into a green input, which is a float, which is just a, you know, a plain floating point number, which is why Maya puts these unit conversions in. The angles are in radians, so they go through these unit conversion factors to go to degrees, which is what you're probably used to, which is 360 degrees for a full circle. It gets converted again. Then we go into the buffer, which is simply what drives the default state of this control. There's nothing else to it. It's kind of like affecting the pivot, but without the pain of affecting the pivot. It requires one more item in the hierarchy, but it's okay. Movement is still there. Then again, we do more of the same in a way. So we have the buffer getting the negation of that angle. So I've used the mult double linear because there's no mult angles. Ryan's nodes hopefully have it. So all I'm doing is taking this angle that's spinning in this direction, negating it so that it spins in this direction, which means that this being this item here, the pedal control, being a child of the staff control, and remember we're driving the buffer for now. If you have a very simple planar rotation, like single axis rotation that goes this way and an item underneath, and you want to counter it so that it looks like in the word space it's not rotating, all you need to do is negate the parent's rotation on that plane, and that's it. Then, because we want to drive the geometry, but as we're doing what I've just mentioned, that leaves this control free to be moved around, which we probably wouldn't want, but I mean, if you have some, you know, some vibration, something like that, well, it's not hooked up yet, but we'll see it. You might want to, anyway, if we rotate these, we actually want to have an effect on the pedal. So we can't just take the buffer, which is always going to be transformed by something else and never going to be manipulated by the animator. We actually want to get this control adding its local offset in terms of that planar rotation to the pedal. So what we do is we use an addition, and again, these are just Maya nodes. Some of them are like really idiotically named, sadly. But if you punch in add, you will get add double linear, and you get a bunch of other nodes. Some of them we'll see because they're quite useful. Then eventually we'll escalate out of those, but they will tend to be end of seasons, because I like to start from vanilla Maya and then show what can be improved or replaced. So all of that done, you know, you finally go out, and this is something that we've discussed in previous streams. It's like having a clear interface between what goes out of your component. So in this case, the pedal component has, let's say, two sort of output interfaces. One is a plain output, which is how we connect from component to other components. And I have no idea if the framing is actually showing my hands, but they're not doing anything other than being Italian. The other one is the form, call it the form hierarchy, whatever you want, which expresses what transforms we actually want to go out with. And that is basically what we hook the geometry up to. Now, this might be a bit confusing in a way, I guess, but this is right now in the center of the word. So if we were to connect, well, actually, it isn't, that's just the people. If we were to connect other things to it, we will need to take care of offsets, and it's not in the center of the word, sorry, it's the pivot is in the center of the staff. So chat seems quiet enough, so either that worked out or I've just made it even more confusing. Now, moving on. Minimal interfaces and all of that. Talk to your animators, try to do as little as possible, as well as possible, so that you get feedback frequently. Software has a lot of good books on frequent iteration, a lot of bad books too. Next thing will be, we've established that if we're driving the pedals through the actual staves and potentially the staves through the wheel, chances are that it's because we want the animators to actually be able to constrain the fit to the pedals. So for one of the pedals, sorry, just a sec. Sorry, scratchy throat. One of the pedals we actually want to let people control to a pretty good extent. The other one, chances are, animators will actually just want to constrain to for the position. Or, you know, or they might not want to. Anyway, it doesn't really matter all that much. But we definitely want to add one, and we want it to have a symmetrical behavior to what we have in there. Now, another thing that might be worth noting here is when I was talking about naming components, I was mentioning dividing by sides and so on. So there's no real hard rules for something like that. Common sense, which is all about common, is the most important factor. But the fact that this has two sides in a way doesn't mean that it necessarily needs to be a component that you divide into, one for the left and one for the right. So here's the thing, and this is what I was mentioning in the beginning, there's no real cases, at least that we want to tackle now, that say that these two items will ever operate not in concert. So if you split it into left and right, you've actually just made more trouble for you. It does have one item that is in a way left and right, which is the pedal, and maybe somebody was actually looking at what I was selected and noticed. It doesn't mean that I have to break convention and split that into a separate component. It still stays in there. It's still considered a middle component. So consider something that operates down the median line. I just happen to have two pedals, one of which is on the left and one of which is on the right. And just call them that. It's perfectly fine to have pedal Sam as a component and then having pedal left and pedal right. So the next thing we want is actually getting something there. And let me reset that. It's also not a bad idea to, it might be a bit tricky now, but whenever you're reading something that is a little bit further ahead than where we are at, it's not a bad idea to move your item at like 10,000 units in off in space, and maybe even rotate it a little bit to make sure that your connections work in non-default spaces. If you're literally prototyping, that's a bit too much of a pain in the back, so we're not going to start from that. But, you know, another magic tip, if you can rig way off center and way off rotation, it's a pretty good idea. So yeah, and somebody was saying, unless the animators want to do a gag and have one break and then be independent. Yeah, that's what I was mentioning in the beginning. It's like you can always find ways where the rig will just not be sufficient. Now, if that is the gag and it's just the one shot, it's perfectly fine. Like, as long as you make sure that you can inject something in the rig for those special shots, gyro rigs that it just applied in shot, it's fine. Don't complicate the rig. And this is true for software as well, actually. Don't complicate anything you design so that you can preemptively address every single case you can think of. That is a recipe for absolute disaster. Address the minimal requirements as well as you can, as quickly as you can, and let them find out what they like about the main use cases. So, obviously, common sense applies again. There are times when that applies and there are times when it doesn't, as in that principle. Common sense should always apply, but again, it's in short supply in general. So let's duplicate that. We should be fine. I mean, if you really wanted to be precise, make sure you have no mistake, you could use a search and replace here. Mine has a semi-decent one, actually. And make sure you take off the number. But right now, vanilla Maya, you know, as much on screen as possible. We're going to go for the paint. So what we want next is place it where the other pedal is. Now, if we've worked in the right way, and I was about to point at the monitor, that's actually supremely useful, I'm sure. If we work the right way, and this is why I recentered a few things, our local space should be here. So doing something like moving something to the other side and then up should be an absolute triviality. Like duplicate it, you will get some values, it will pop in the right place. Now, and I will discuss stuff like this, like the fact that this is a doubled up icon, there's two of them, but let's focus on this for a second. Now, if you have a case where the two sides are clearly going to be doing different things and you want one of them to be dominant or something like that, don't be afraid of like differentiating it in the interface. If you have, call them icons, call them whatever you want, this your control shapes, if they're a little bit more complex, if you and your animators are right with more complex shapes, you could even put visual hints and establish a language for what is dominant or not. As far as hints go, you could choose to have translation, like translation only controls having a strong triangular theme, rotation only controls having a strong circular theme, scaling only controls having a strong square theme. Things that can be used for both, you could use a mix of them. It's like there are some applicable principles to that kind of stuff, but because the users are so strongly opinionated about it, you gotta talk to your users for those things, which is a shame, but you know, we do what we gotta do. So if you only had Spock as your user, you could use Logic, but animators don't work like Spock. Now, next thing we want to do is establish the same kind of auto rotation, which should mean that you mostly should have similar connections. So let's go and find footrest mesh. So, okay, now that is coming from negation of the middle. Now this is basically the hotspot for these. The operations for these are going on in here. So there's no real reason why we can't use these. And I don't know how the graphs read on stream actually, guys. Let me know, because I'm using a subsection of a pretty high DPI monitor. So for me this is pretty nightmarish, but I hope it reads well for you in a 1080p stream. And so we grab the unit conversion. Now this is not a bad thing. Having something that's central going out to multiple destinations, as long as you're taking care of spaces and everything properly, is usually a good thing. Sure behavior is normally a good thing. It gets you good trickle down of uploads, a good trickle down of actual features. I don't know why I said uploads. Graphs are reading fairly well, so let's go. Same rules apply. This is Nodelling. Again, that's courtesy of Ryan, though I don't think he quite invented it. I've heard people say nodeling and stuff like that before. Still well done. you got 2 words into the stream at this point, Ryan. Now, buffer is there, same thing that we did before. As you go through things, like, remember you haven't hooked up the geometry, so you only have the control to check that everything is in good shape. This is hierarchically under that, we're cool with that. Now, this is the will main, will matrix. We don't care about that for now. I don't know why it ended up in there, probably for some mesh relationship. So what I want to do next is, and this is going to be, you know, an issue that we need to resolve possibly, is establish our outputs. Now we only have one pedal SRT, and that's going from the control out to the other mesh. Absolutely not great, because what we have is a central item that's now driving a lot of stuff that we don't want it to drive. This is coming from the staves, so it's probably coming from the wheel or something like that, that we will need to make sure that we drive differently later on. Just a sec. I never heard Nodelling until you said it. That word is entirely your Kofefe. Oh, Jesus, the Kofefe thing. Really? I thought you put it on Twitter at some point, and I was like, oh, yeah. So we're using that word. Anyway, Nodelling it is. It's with 2 L's, I believe. Otherwise, it's Nodelling, which is the brother of a node. Like when nodes are brother, they're nodelings. I don't know. This is getting terrible. Let's stop here. So here's the issue we have. We only have one output for the deformation stage, and it's in center word, and that's probably not great. And we have this local word that's going out to a bunch of things that we're not really using. Don't love it. And if you use your greater than sign, you can see what it's affecting, which is a crap ton of stuff. So it's actually affecting the pole mesh. And now we're also going straight from this to the actual footrest mesh. Also not great. We say we would have actually had explicit interfaces, and we clearly failed at that. Are the names right? Yeah, at least the names are right. So here's what's going to happen. First we need to rename, and then we need to properly escalate those things. You just trump this stream. Oh, Jesus, this is getting stronger and stronger. It's more dad jokes. So let's rename that and turn it into what it actually is, which is, for now, we're probably going to call it the pole. Now, we can duplicate it a couple of times. It'll be fine. So here's another thing. If your joints are completely default, they're just flat primitives, they respond pretty well to all the standard stuff. If you start having joint orientations and options and weird thingies, yeah, maybe not so much. Now, you could choose to do a couple of things. I am absolutely not against having things in a hierarchy when they're part of the output, if the hierarchy makes sense, and then you go out to whatever you want, because it's well within the boundaries of your component. So you're managing it. Yes, you will have, you know, if you break hierarchies here and you were relying on the locality of some transforms, you will have to manage it synchronously with what you were doing with the controls. But it belongs. It's all in the same box. So that is perfectly fine for me. You might choose to have different rules. Feel free to do whatever you need to do. So this is going to be pedal left and pedal right. Now, what we actually wanted to do is, this was rotation only. The translate was left to the hierarchy. Not a huge fan of that, but we're gonna live with it for a little bit longer. What we actually want to do is this pedal right or left? This is pedal left. So a little bit more nodeling, and this is where it's really tough to stream. It's like you're doing all this crap that is like really not entertaining to watch. It's cathartic maybe, it's like UV unwrapping, and you gotta talk over it. So I reckon the hardest thing about streaming is not rigging, it's actually talking over this kind of crap. Now, let's see that we haven't broken anything. We shouldn't have. I mean, this is pretty straightforward connection. That is why I say don't complicate things for as long as you can keep them uncomplicated. When you have to, when you find that you have to extend your interface to go out, to something else, or that your interface was too narrow, it will pay in spades. As simple as possible for as long as possible, but no simpler is always going to pay off. Now, the next thing we want to do is basically emulate these, which is adding the 2 axes, I think is what we're doing here. So rotate X here. All right, what the... I love the node editor. Okay, there you go. It just decided to move everything. Good Lord. So I have to figure out, like, it doesn't happen at work as often, so I might have found some magic setting years ago that magically as well also keeps traveling down my preferences from version to version. So one note, I think all of these notes that I've been using in so far, you can find in at least as early as Maya 2015, I'm sure. There's some stuff that we might use later that might be 2016 only or 2017 only. But there's usually other previous notes. I'll try to go as far back into legacy nodes as possible while we're still using factory nodes, but no promises, because some of the new stuff is actually very convenient. It's very late, but better late than never, I guess. Now, we just want to emulate the same connections we had before, and that's the output that we wanted. So even your graph, like if you're, you know, tidy enough, don't get like super anal retentive with it, but a little bit of patterning will usually help. There should be another footrest mesh. There you go. And okay. And oh, by the way, if you're doing stuff like this and you don't want the shapes in the way, you can actually turn those off. And I thought I had them turned off. Careful with these settings, because at one point it will bite you. You'll go like hunting down something. Why is it not showing up? And your options were wrong. There's a myriad of options in the preferences as well that can sort of interact in some weird ways at times. Now, what we're connecting here, I think, was pretty much everything. Yep, we're gonna do the same thing. Again, we're relying on the hierarchy a little bit here. Not fond of it, but you know, one step at a time. There is no disable for auto layout. I think there's several things that you can do, and yes, you can pin nodes when you begin. When a node comes in, you can auto pin it. So if you select your nodes and if you press P for the default shortcuts, and there's stuff up there as well. This icon here, that thumbtack, is actually going to mean that your nodes are pinned. It also means that they're pinned for existence, though. If you do things like you change the way the graph pulls nodes in and stuff like that, that will also affect those. So yeah, it's not bad. But now something has gone slightly off, which means that we have a difference in the two sides. So this is the joint we're going out to here. Joints are fairly similar. These possibly the pivots are different, and this is translate. What is it? Okay, I'll have to look into that. Anyway, now, oh, that's probably the joint bringing it in. So, all right, I must be doing something stupid here. Oh yes, of course. I've linked the translation, so it's adding in. I need to look at what the offsets are for the meshes and stuff like that, because it looks like they are. Oh, that's for the pole. I'm stupid. 0273. So the pin mesh is there. This is there. All right. Cool. So we do not want to add the translation to it for now. Well, this is the kind. I'm not going to spend, you know, minutes debugging the graph. It's all just about going back through the graph and finding what is going on. It's not guaranteed that all my meshes are in the right places, that all my pivots are in the right places, so I'm not going to waste your time. And there's an offset on the other, and this is axis inverted, which is right, so that pushes it back in. So you can pin the node to stop it from doing auto lay. Oh, okay, that's the one I read before. Yeah, so pinning, you know, use it if you want. It's probably a good idea while you're what do you say, nodeling, but it's you know, if you it will interact. I believe I haven't used it. I always use additive graphing mode so that if I bring something in, it doesn't, or if I sync, it doesn't wash away all my layout. But if you don't use additive, I think that pin nodes, actually we can try it. So if you're not in additive mode, and by the way, be careful because these are per session. So you turn things off in a tab and you think they're actually just for that tab. No, that's also gonna bite you in the ass unless you're careful. So one of the things, if you do something like that and then you select something else and you do that, well, when nothing's selected, it will clear. So if you're in additive mode, meaning Maya tutorial, I guess, as you do that, it will add nodes to your graph. Now, sometimes you want a sync to selection kind of behavior. So you want something like that, and you select something else, you want something like that. And I believe that if you pin your nodes, that behavior is overridden. Yeah, so the things you bring in with nodes auto pin basically overrides the locality of that. It's not too bad. Look, at the end of the day, it's just about learning to use it. So something that not a lot of people know, these are pretty much the same as most browser tabs. So if you middle click, you close one, which is also hilarious when you just change shortcuts or something like that and you think you were clicking on something with a Wacom and then you close it. Settings for the node editor per session, that's stupid. Yeah, you know, some people like centralized settings. For me, for something that has tabs where I want to keep several bits of potentially very complex graphs as my vision over the part of the rig, yeah, the centralized settings are fairly dangerous. The node editor is actually pretty good in many regards, but it needs a lot of polishing and love. But it's not, I don't know why, it's not been super well received. Probably not everybody was willing to put up with the pain. If you're an Autodesk client and you start rigging by nodes, like, give them hell, like, get them to fix this stuff. Now, because I appear to often be the only one that's whinging and moaning about it. And anyway, rant aside, so we got the behavior we kind of want for that. This should actually now respond as well. Cool. So the next thing for this, and I'm wondering like how unexciting it's getting at this point. The next thing we want to do for something like this is hook it up to the wheel, solely for the purpose of making these slightly more interesting to look at, as in more stuff happening. Now, I have also, as I said, reset all my HRCs to be non-transforms, which is how you kind of want them to be if there's only supposed to be indicating your hierarchy. And I am gonna hook up more to the actual, yeah, it's back in additive. I'm only gonna hook up more to the actual meshes themselves. So the wheel is already hooked up to something, which is the wheel SRT, which is correct. It's getting the word transform of the wheel main control, which only after much pain I have learned to not be an actual rotation axis. And that's good. So what we now want for this forward driving kind of case, what we want is the wheel to drive the pedals. By the way, I'm going to do an hour and 50 minutes stream and 50 minutes Q&A. Last stream wasn't super happy with it, so bonus time because I actually wanted to show something happening. Hopefully this is going better. I am liking it better at least. Now, wheel main control. So let's find it, and that's a pretty well populated one. It's actually not too bad. So we have an input and we have a buffer. Those are probably, we're gonna find, are probably gonna be connected. Yep. So we have a buffer, we're getting the local word. That local word is getting something from the master offset. And yes, I did redo the God node stuff. So this is working all right. Now, if we make the wheel driven by the pedals, we're gonna do the first scenario as the easiest thing. Then we don't want to actually have this thing driven by the God node. So that matrix is probably going to be useful because it's just converting the word. It's already spaced where we want it. And local word, actually. So that is will component input, and that's the output of the other. So where we want to sever things is actually here. Now what we want to get is the local word space for that control, which should be the one driving our buffer around to to actually be driven by the pedals output. So let's have a look at where that ended up. I am fearing, yeah, actually someone was saying Maya can smell fear, make no sudden moves. That's true, and just as I read that, I was saying I am fearing how this is going to be when we're going to do more complex rigs. Because this, by any standard and definition, this is a tiny graph. For some complex components, it's not uncommon for me to work with a couple hundred nodes at a time. And that is where the node editor missing compounds and stuff like that, compared to ICE in XSI, so painful, so unnecessarily painful. If they took care of these will take Maya, like, it will level up Maya, seriously level it up. Anyway, now we have said that, yes, we wanted the form to take care of going out to the meshes. We've done that for those. It's fine if you want, if that's your thing, if that's what you establish, if that's a contract you establish, it's actually okay to conflate the component output and the deformation output. Personally, I try not to. And yes, I say do things minimally early on as you're prototyping. I think conflating the output between components and the output to the meshes is overly minimalistic, so I always do proper separate outputs for those. It also becomes pretty painful to debug and move things around. Silly question, what is the hotkey to drag over a connection to break it? Oh yeah, sorry, I keep doing it. So it's that thing, which a lot of people don't even know. If you hold down Alt, you get View. If you hold down Alt and Shift, and Alt and Shift will do nothing if you use the normal clicks. But if you know, what is it? Sorry. Yeah, hold down Alt and Shift, and then what? Okay. Now obviously I've done it all the time, and it's now misbehaving. What the? Okay. So if you hold down Alt and Shift and click your way, you will draw this, and that is a cutter. I don't know if you can see the icon, but they will cut connections. And yeah, it's not control. It's kind of idiosyncratic, because Shift is actually adding or toggling in Maya. It should be control, but control, because it's part of the view shortcuts. Control is actually your Alt control is your area zoom, which a lot of people also don't know about. And anyway, it's pretty useful. I like it a lot. So I don't know if you have node shake as well. No, you don't. So that would have been cool actually. In shake, and Nuke picked it up, and even Windows picked it up actually. If you shook something quick enough, it will disconnect it. That's where the name Shake came from. And if you're younger than 25 and you have never heard of Shake, it was the first nodal compositing system that went. It was really cheap software only and went massive. Not the first nodal in general though. So moving on. Local word. This is the input for our wheel. We're happy with it. It goes out to the buffer. We're happy with it. We want it to be word space. So we do have that, but we don't have an output for the controls. We didn't think it was needed, so we're actually gonna get ourselves one. What have I done? We're actually gonna get ourselves one. Duplication is fine in this case. If you don't duplicate special, it won't take your connection. So output local word, we want to say that this is the staves for now. That's not a good name, but we're gonna go into more precise naming for spaces and sequences and stuff like that when we have good enough examples, like maybe a spine. So we don't care about this being in the graph. We do care about this pretty much taking from whatever control we're using. We want the wheel to be driven the same way. The pedals spinning, like the spin in place, they should have no effect on anything. But we want the wheel to be driven by the same thing that is driving the staves. So it should be fairly easy to look at what drove that pole. we use the same connection or possibly a richer one for it. And that's going to be our output. Let me move those nodes. So actually I might pin a bunch of nodes. That's a good point made there. Now, we probably want this thing to drive we want to have a full output for that, for this actual set of controls. Because chances are when we actually get to the master node, we will drive that as our top tier item. It should be pretty up top, yeah. So this is likely going to be affecting everything. So we want to get the word transfer for that, and that should be a decompose. We know that this is our output, and this is going to be in word transfer. Let's make sure of it. Yeah, it is. So word matrix, input matrix. I mean, this has been done a few times. I'm just talking over it for the sake of talking. So translate, and so 2. So let's do that, and then let's actually. I'm sorry. I think I'll have to do the maps part the next time, because I want to dedicate a little bit of time to doing an IK-like behavior for the pedals. I don't want to rush it through in 10 minutes. Now, staves SRT, history and streams make a liar of us all. We want to go out to the input of the wheel, and that should be again a pretty straightforward kind of operation, and that should have now done what we wanted to do. I also love how sometimes you get rotate, scale, and translate in a different order, depending on what mode you're in and how they're connected, how that node has been brought in. I don't know if you saw it, but yeah, when I just brought it in, I had nothing connected. It started with rotate. I don't know. It's one of those things that's infuriating, like non-consistency of order, and that might be because whoa, okay, this is also useful. Like, sure, shoot my node into the stratosphere. I think that comes in because this is actually fixed order, and obviously it's rotate, scale, and translate. It's completely different from what you will use it for most of the time, and because it's been connected that way, the first time this node comes up, it will be reordered like that. More useful stuff, please give Autodesk hell. Make them fix these. I like the node editor, or at the very least I don't dislike it. I would like it to be much better than this. So, alright, now we have the pedals driving the wheel in general. That's alright. So, 10 minutes to go, and again, my apologies, gonna do vectors the next time. It's only tomorrow. I'm sure you guys can hold it for another 24 hours, 23 hours, even less. Now, the controls I already discussed do something that you can select and tell apart from other things from all angles. And but when you do God nodes or something like that, so when you do something that is pretty key, pretty central to something, it is not a bad idea, because this will be defining the space, what the word is for a lot of people. That sounds very important, but what the word space, what they will see as the local space that they want to operate that rig in, will be for the entire rig or large chunks of the rig, and we're gonna add more of these. You will do well for your own sanity to always add offsets to these things, because what happens all the time is people will connect it to something. Now I was selecting the offset, yeah. People will connect it to something and animate that thing happily moving along, and then they go, oh, I want to change the pivot for this, but you really don't want to give people control over the pivot in Maya. Even if we use them, even if we consider them as useful attributes, animating them is a nightmare. Wrapping them so that the animators have quick access to it is a double nightmare. So what happens is that if you have an available offset, it's pretty easy for people to choose, and they need to realign things. It's pretty easy for people to make that the one that they either apply like noise and layered animation kind of stuff to, but it's also very easy and hide it by default maybe for something that was traveling in that direction. What am I? Have I inverted this? I think I have. Yeah, normally I have these icons the other way around. That is dumb as crap. So let me check that super quick, because I might have outgoing connections. Yep. So the offset is going out to that. I definitely want to invert those. Let me Come on. Behave. No? Okay. So you have to parent twice before it actually decides to parent. Don't ask me why. Because my own reasons. I haven't saved in a million years. That is a good reminder that I should actually save. So this is driving me insane. Alright, I'll do it another time. Let's do it off screen. So normally I have the smaller inner circle. For me is the offset. Anyway, so what you will swap them in your brain for just the next 2 minutes. What you will normally find is people are maybe animating this way, or they have a complex enough motion twirling which is prone to gimbal lock. And then they decide that they actually want to animate that. See, I keep doing it. They want to animate it parallel to the ground. The offsets are what are actually going to give people a fighting chance when that happens, so that they can then swap the visibility of things and start working off the offset. Establish the space as something with the main control and then actually do the work with the offset. Now, because it's an offset, that also means that I never buffer them, because otherwise it just becomes more of a pain. So, all right. With that said, the next thing we need to do, now we have a master SRT, bad name, but we'll go over that another time. Now that we have the pedals as the master item for this hierarchy, could have stayed in the channel box. That's what we actually want to get the God node to go out to. That also means that every time you want the master control, I might have just said that, but I seem to have Alzheimer today. You actually want to get its offset, and most of the time you want that hidden. Invert the icons, I'll do it later in your brain. So we do have the master SRT going out. It should be hooked up to the offset, yes. We have this from a long distance past, which was the addition of the height of that. And so we will now look at the pedals input, which should have a local word. Now we've already applied the offset internally, and I've mentioned this before. I mean, you can choose to have those offsets in the underword or not. I will probably say you do want that. So let me see. Do I have that in? So yeah, I was actually adding to it so that the actual pedals control buffer goes in there. Either way is fine. If you know ahead of time that this is going to be the master space anyway, and you're okay offsetting everything internally, that's perfectly fine. It keeps the underword between components cleaner. If you reuse the components a lot more and they need to be offset depending on what they're connected to a lot, then you could decide to actually leave it to outer influences. It depends on how complex the offset might need to be. So it means that we should not need these anymore, and we should be able to just connect these two together, make sure that the ordering is the same. All right, that should work. Don't need these anymore, which gets rid of our underword. So for the sake of keeping things relatively clean, well, no, we can keep it. The root is the active one anyway. All right, we made this far without crashes. And I might be jinxing it now, but there's only 4 minutes to go. All right. So I think this is a good enough place to stop for a little bit. If the chat wants to go off on, like, if you think I should do something more on this Nodelling session, I think getting the wheel and the pedals and like the whole set of the pedal stuff, for what I would probably consider an FK rig, is good enough for now. Let me know if you guys have any questions about what we just gone over, if you want me to go on for another 5 minutes. Otherwise, any questions in general, we're gonna move into Q&A. And tell me I'm recording this. I'm convinced that I actually, yeah, I did press start recording. That's good. I think it just had a small heart attack there. So, and that's one of the other reasons why, if there's enough of a Twitch following and we actually get partner, I don't care for the donation stuff at all. but you get to archive the streams, which will be pretty good because if it it doesn't put as much pressure on me to upload to YouTube to make the archives available, and if it ever happens that the actual side recording goes to crap, I can always catch the Twitch archive for a bit. Anyway, yeah, I reckon we've done all we needed to do for this. I'm wondering if people are even hearing me. The chat is like eerily quiet. 3 minutes ahead of the closure of the stream. Well, or the Q&A part, if there are any. The thing with partnering with Twitch is that you can't upload to another site for 24 hours. Yeah, I know of that, but I don't know of literally anybody that cares about that. I mean, if you look at a number of people that from the handmade community, it's like all of their streams are up within 3 hours of being done on Twitch. They're up on their YouTube channels. But even then, it wouldn't be an issue, honestly, because the stream will be done. It will be instantly available for everybody to view as a Twitch archive. And that means that if the YouTube one is a day late, sure, I'll be happy to honor that contract, to be honest. So no other questions, right? Feedback on how this stream went. Is this amount of nodeling something you guys can cope with? I'll give it 2 minutes, and after that I'll shut down. Okay. There might be one. Would you add attribute to the pedal to have the option on animator to turn off the -1 rotation? Sure, you could actually. That's not a bad point. Let's actually noodle that into submission. You can add all the options you want, and the quality of a well-designed graph, of a well-designed flow, is that it's easy to inject into. So there's one quote that I heard a while ago that I loved, and that was about writing APIs and it was work. Somebody said, I really want us to write code that we're not afraid to modify, which is a great quote. And it's the same when you graph out a rig. Like, make sure that quality comes from iterations. That's the end of the story. Happy users need to feel ownership of what they're doing, which means you have to be able to give them something to produce feedback on frequently and address feedback frequently. So in this case, yeah, you might want to give them the option. What I will consider is, let's say that they decide that on this pedal specifically, they want an attribute for a blend factor. Now, the inheritance of that, like what happens with that specific attribute, comes from a head, and from something that it goes to something that by being the parent of the pedal, so there is a relationship here going in this direction. If you had an attribute here and connected it back to the mode double linear, and let me explain in a second why I will do that, you get some circularity. It might be benign, so you might get away with it, and we'll go through that when we do a little bit of graph theory. But your other option will be to actually have a control panel for, all these things that can be tweaked. Now, the graph in this case is good, as in it's easy to modify, because the way you set up the way we set up the operations for now is that how much inheritance you have, how much counter rotation you have, is tied to a very simple, very controllable thing. So if you want to turn it off, and I'm using the same for both, so if you decide to have it by 2, then you will need to split this node in 2, but that's a pretty easy modification, right? So you can actually give them a blend of how much rotation they want to negate, or you could actually give them something to multiply. And as far as where to put it, you have a pedal stuff that is ahead. It's upstream in the graph, so you could very, very trivially go in there and go and add a channel there. So actually, sorry, it's easy to do from here. So you could add, these are angles, and you can't really add anyway. We're getting into floats there, so it's cool. Float, and let's call it we're gonna be extremely verbose. Animators will probably we'll probably want something more legible than this. Override nice name. Sure. Let's make it what would animators like? Something that makes absolutely like gives you no ability to discern what is going on, but it's short. And if you wanted to cap it so that it doesn't do damage, it doesn't over rotate or under rotate or something like that, you could give it a range. Otherwise, give it some silly range. You still want to do, if you actually do it by script, you have soft min and soft max. You still want to do something like that because it makes it a slider in the UI. To be a slider in the UI, it needs to have a range. Otherwise, you just get a text box. So we would add that and close it. Now we should have an attribute here that we can use, and that's going to be our blend factor. I think I left the default at 0, and we probably would have wanted the default at -1. You might want to multiply it or whatever so that it's more intuitive for the animators. But long story short about that, if we now connect that into this, come on, you can do it, Maya. What you have now is, see, I need to make the geometry non-selectable. That's also going to be driving me insane. What you have now is that you can, from that control, determine, see, I was rotating that stupid manipulator. You can control from here whether you want the blend to work in one direction, the other, or, you know, you could even do very silly things with it. Come on. So would I add it? It doesn't really matter to me, I will say. It depends on what the animators actually want. What I will say that you should take away from these is, it's good if you, like, don't overdo things in the beginning, but if you know ahead of time that your animators have some specific requests that always come through, and you know that ahead of time you can leave space in your graph to actually address them later on, then do it. So, I haven't finished the other stream yet. Why do you have a namespace of underworld? Why namespace is right now? Nothing like really specific about it. It's explained in the other stream. It's purely organizational, and we won't get into what the proper underworld is for a while. Need a few components and complex enough connections between the components for that to actually make enough sense. So what do we have? Is it R&D only? To the right. Sorry, this is mumbling, but I'm trying to figure out what is going on. So somebody said thought the namespace was because it wasn't part of either one of the components. That is correct. That is what we're calling an underworld for now, which is that network between the components that doesn't really belong to any of them, but is fundamental in how they interact. So create a proxy attribute. Wait, sorry. Yeah, proxy attributes in exercise, something I missed, but the way the graph works in Maya is so profoundly different that exercise could get away with murder in some regards, and proxy attributes, man, I miss them a lot. So the risk of benign cycles of your control is so easy to make that happen. If your animator asks for stupid things, like yeah, animators will ask for stupid things. To be honest, in a way, if you give them solid, fast rigs, the majority, and you let them contribute to things, the majority of animators I find respond pretty well. The majority being just over 50%. It's not like it's a staggering majority. For the rest, you can always apply violence. So will you get the cycle and controls if you add the attribute on a node upstream and then have the attribute driven from another control? Look, the cycle will... Yeah, you can always have a cycle happen. So again, this is where graph theory, like a little bit of it, needs to come into play for things to make really sense. But okay. Sorry, I had a couple notifications on Twitch. We'll get into it. It's very easy to create graph cycles when people want a lot of blends, especially if they want something on a part of the graph that blends the state of the object that they want that blend on. If that makes sense. Like very often people go like, oh, I want my IKFK blend to actually affect the foot roll, and the foot roll is the one that's actually driving the IK effector. So sometimes you just deal with the benign cycle. If you have a switchboard situation where you can switch everything at once into binary states, the cycle is extremely benign, as in it's literally just in the connections, it's not really in the effects. Some other times you have a benign cycle that can be collapsed with a double level, and that's what a lot of Maya constraints create all the time, which in parallel level you see as actual clusters of evaluation. Don't like them. I don't want them in my rigs, but if you're prototyping, maybe deal with it, and it's okay. Like, you can deal with it for a little bit, and that's okay. Other times you will find that you have to duplicate entire chunks of the rig to stage operations multiple times to break some of the cycles. That's all. And if that doesn't make sense, if a lot of that doesn't quite make sense, that's okay. Don't worry. We're gonna get into that, and that is the kind of stuff that I'm hoping to get to as early as season 1, and not only just season 1, but early season 1. Has Maya graph gotten any more cycle tolerant with new Evo nodes as compared to classic DAG? It's tough to tell, because I am pretty ruthless in avoiding cycles, so it's you can get away with it. You can get away with some of them. It's like the parameters are pretty simple, and I think they might have strengthened it a bit because of all the work they've done on the parallel evaluation. So probably if you're asking how has Maya gotten any more cycle tolerant with new Evo nodes compared to classic DAG, like, I mean, DAG itself like should be completely acyclic other than a few exceptions. Compared to 2015, probably yes. 2016 to 2017, there's some custom evaluators. There's the whole visibility kerfuffle thing, which I'm not super fond of, like visibility preventing Evo to emulate the old stuff. That seems to have squelched a few more bugs, and surely they must have squelched quite a few bugs because it's getting used more and more. So I'd say yes, it's getting a little bit better, but I will still try and stay away as much as possible from cyclic graphs. Maybe I missed it, but I never stated how long a season will be. However long it needs to be honest. For like, this season is somewhat, specializing. I'm literally trying to find the format. I'm learning to do this myself, and that's why I picked an overly simplistic rig. Because I just wanted it to go from when I started to SIGGRAPH, then get a feeling for how it went, get some feedback, talk to a few people in person at SIGGRAPH. If it works out, then it's however long it takes us to get a rig from nothing to somewhere where I think enough has been taught that is tied to that rig and that doesn't work better for the next. So let's say season 1 we do a ball and legs, and we don't mean to get into bendy limbs, although you could add them. It depends on how many streams I can do a week as well, which is unknown yet. That might be, I don't know, maybe 12 weeks or 15 weeks or 16 weeks. If the following one we decide to tackle an actual cartoony characters and have bendy limbs and a number of more complex things, that might take me as long as 6 months, and so be it. There's nothing really, like, the season is just divide things down stage by rigs, so that I can escalate, both vertically and horizontally, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's all I got. Hopefully all of that makes sense. All right, my voice is a little bit short. Seems to have quieted down, so I reckon this is a good moment to call it. So thanks everybody for attending. It's always good to see people on the stream. It helps a lot, guys. Keep spreading the word if you can. Keep showing up when you can, and I will put these on. YouTube pretty quickly. And if you're watching this archive, like, a few people ask when are the models going to be available. I really need to get GitHub large files working, and then I would like to actually update, like on GitHub or somewhere else, actually put the scenes up there so that people can choose to pull the tags for every stream. There's going to be a tag, and maybe here there's something not dissimilar for the repositories and its code, which possibly makes it a little bit easier, but it should work out as well. So something like that. If it turns out to be too technical for, you know, too many users, then I might actually just offer straight file downloads. All right. Thanks again, everybody, and have a good day. I'm going to stop this one now.